today I'm continuing my work on my Senior. As you can tell, I field stripped it pretty good, but specifically going to work on the rear drive. Essentially, a Senior has, the motor, transmission, drive shaft, and then the rear section of an old Ford. The axles from the rear end itself goes to these gear cases, which transfers power to the rear wheels. Mine has the heavy duty brakes, I guess, because they pulled all this stuff out of a junkyard. And this particular one happened to be, I guess they call it a V8 style brake because it's pretty big, and the wheels have these smaller like lugs to reach the brake drum. You'll see some Seniors with a smaller brake and a longer legs to the brake drum itself. I guess that was a 4-cylinder, or shows that it was a 4-cylinder car that it was taken from. In either case, it doesn't matter. These things don't really need bigger brakes versus smaller brakes. I do like the look of the bigger brakes, so I got lucky when I got this Senior. So we're going to go ahead and tear it apart. I'm going to kind of do it real time, which is a little different than what I normally do, but with full transparency. I've already torn this thing apart to make sure that there wasn't any major issues. And I've already have the other side of the gear, tractor, that gear case is all torn apart also and laying on the floor. We'll take a look at those parts as soon as we get done with this. So first up, we've got to take the rim off the brake. Now, out of the 10 lugs, I only destroyed one, so the other side needs one lug replaced. These here, I guess I made these a little tighter than I thought. All the lugs on this side, I was able to save, so that's huge, because I don't really feel like getting involved with that. Because then you got to press them out, got to press them in, got to find one. Okay, and we don't need that. There we go. Take that, put that over there. There we go. Got to get that wheel out of the way. So essentially you're left with this. Now there is a large nut right here that has to be removed. I have it loose. There was a cotter pin holding it together. So we'll take that off. Next. Come on. Jeez. All right, there we go. Next, I took a big gear puller. There's a washer. We don't need that either. I just took a gear puller, centered it on the shaft, gripped it from the edges here, the inner edges, and pulled it off. Okay. And the reason for that is this. The actual shaft is tapered, okay, and it has a corresponding taper and a key, which goes into the shaft itself. Let's see, can I turn this? No, it's not going to turn right now, but there's a keyway that interfaces with a key here in the brake drum. And we'll take a look at this specifically in just a few minutes. Put that on the floor. Next, there's 4 bolts that hold the brake assembly to the gear case cover itself. Now, from what I can find out, this is essentially just the backing plate of the Ford car that they tore this thing out of, which is kind of cool. So there's like Ford brakes here. So I'm just going to pull these out and we'll take a look at the next section here. So let's go ahead, let's line it up. All of this is kind of interesting that all the nuts and all the bolts are all the same size. So you really don't only need to have the one size. All right. I'm just going to go get my 1/2-inch ratchet. There we go. Take that off. Now this thing was filled with gear lube and grease, and when I first took it apart, it was actually kind of a disaster. I made a mess of everything. The other thing I noticed too is when I was taking these particular bolts holding the backing plate in place, they were quite tight. There was a lot of corrosion and just like dirt that had built up in the threads. And I think that's because the seam is open to the elements right there, so a lot of water and dirt probably got forced between the parts over the years. Pull this out. Pull this out. You can see the backing plate just drop down a little bit because I do have pretty much all disconnected already. There is a brake on my tractor. The brakes are actually actuated by a bar and not a cable. Supposedly, from what I've been told, that is an example of an early 1955 tractor. I don't know when in 1955, and then in 56 they actually had brake cables from the car, kind of like what they did with an RJ35 and the brake cable going on those, like the brake kits and stuff. So this bar is held in with just a cotter pin. Pull the cotter pin out, bar comes right off, and then we can slide the backing plate right off. We'll put that on the floor for right now. Next, we have the actual gear case, and it's an amazing thing here because Wheel Horse actually had these casted. The pond people actually had this casted. You could never cast this today. It would cost you $1,000 a piece just to make these castings, and that's part of the reason why I love working on these things, is just to see the design and the changes, things that you just don't see anymore. It just doesn't happen. Nobody would ever do this again, and nobody would actually even buy it probably, because they're like, I'm not buying a tractor with old car parts. That's ridiculous. But there's a series of 5/16 bolts on the backside. Just go right around and take it off. What I did was I took them all off except for the top one, so that way the gear case cover doesn't fall on the floor. Oops. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break here for a second, get all these bolts out because there's about 10 of them, and then when I take off the gear case, I'll be right back. Okay, I have all the bolts out all the way around except for the very top bolt. One thing I learned is this is not dowel pinned in or anything to that effect. So when you take this bolt out, make sure you're holding your gear case cover in position, because if this thing falls on the floor and cracks, I would say you're pretty much done. These things are even harder than RJ35s to find. So I'm just trying to get this bolt out. There we go. You can see how it just wants to fall. Just take it, you're going to pull it out real slow. And that is the gear case cover right there. We'll put that on the floor so we don't ruin it. There we go. And here's basically the drive system. This is your banjo rear end from the Ford. The axle comes through, and then there's a gear right here, which interfaces with another big gear, I guess you want to call it, where the actual axle shaft, or the other half of the axle that would have been in the car, so to speak, is right here. And this thing's held in by nothing. You just kind of go like this and slide it off. There's the bearing that it's riding in, and this axle piece is off. Put that on the floor gently. This gear is, a factory gear. It's not held in with anything, so you can just take it and it's just held in with a keyway, and that gear comes off. Both my gears are in pretty good shape, but the teeth are a little bit beat. I did find a gear that would work. A gentleman that's a friend of mine gave me the part number that he used to get the gear. A couple things. One, it's not keyed. The replacement gear is not keyed, so you'd have to have that machined and keyed. And two, I noticed that in the measurements, the teeth aren't quite as long as the originals, so it doesn't interface with the big gear as stoutly. Not that that makes much of a difference. We're not going to really use this, but my gears are in pretty good shape. There are a couple teeth that are bad or chipped, and we'll look at that in a later video. But so I may, and this is cast, while the replacements are actually like steel, like a piece of steel that they machine. So with that, I'm probably going to have to weld up a couple of these teeth and grind them down and make them pretty again. But I think I am going to reuse my original gears. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to replace them. But essentially, there it is. That is how the wheel horse gear case comes apart. Now, I did drain the oil. I did loosen all the bolts up before I made this little tidbit video. But essentially, that's how it comes apart. It was, I was more nervous about it than actually doing it, because I never tore one of these things apart. And, the parts themselves are a little bit, they're rare, they're hard to find, don't want to break it. But in general, it really comes apart pretty easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the parts from the other side, because I've actually pulled the seals and the bearings out and everything to that effect. And we're going to go over that and see how that looks. I've laid out one side of the gear case parts on the right hand side, and on the left I just have the brake system all put together so we can take a look at them. I didn't really clean this one yet, but I just dusted, brushed off most of the garbage out of it so we could take a look at what it looks like. The adjusters at the bottom, we have a series of springs, and then there's a cam system up at the top which actually actuate the brake shoes, and we'll take a look at that. It'll, in depth in a later date, but essentially here are the pieces of the opposing side, but somewhat cleaned up. I cleaned up the backing plate so we could take a look at it. Inside the adjuster are these two little arms. It's a screw style, so like you would adjust it with this little guy right here with a 7/16 wrench. It screws in, it screws out. There's a cone. There's a cone that is pushed in and out. They ride on the sides of this, which ultimately pushes these adjusters in and out equally, both sides. And that's how you would adjust the brake shoes. There's a drive gear. Obviously, the brake drum fits on the end of this. The opposing side of this is actually supported by this bearing ring, and we'll talk about that at a later time, but just to give you some points of reference. The end of this shaft is in pretty rough shape. Somebody must have had, the brake drum must have spun on it. So we'll need to file that down and clean it all up. Here are the general brakes. Obviously 2 shoes, 2 adjuster springs. The springs are right there, as you can see. Inside this little area right here, this is where that cam arm comes out. There are 2 bushings, one on this side, one on the opposing side, right there. This particular backing plate, the bushings were destroyed because somebody decided to do some handiwork on the cam arm. It was bent, and they put some brass on there, I guess to fill in the wear that was on the bar. It was also bent. Since I'm putting this part of the video together, I did heat it up with the torch. I straightened it out. I filed and sanded it down so it would fit into the bushings on this side. The reason why is because the bushings on this side were so bad. So this should work. Ultimately, that little ball, this like socket goes on the ball. This is the adjuster. When you press the brakes, this goes up and down. The sides of this ride on these little, there's like little washers. You can barely see it, but there's like little washers inside, or like spacers in there. That's what actually forces the brake shoe in and out on both sides. There's the mount. This is the post that it runs on. This one is interesting. This one happens to be bolted into place, but on this one, it looks like it's, whoops, down there. Looks factory welded or spot welded into place. That doesn't look like a homemade job, but it could be. I may have to take this all apart and make my own, to be honest, to fix this side. I've already looked at the bushings on this side and this cam arm. They had their hand, whoever owned this tractor before me had their hand on this cam arm also, but it's not as bad, so I don't really need to work on it. The bushings are still good, so I just need to replace the bushings on this side. But essentially, there's the little actuator arm where the brake bar goes to. got the gear case, we've got the drum. The drum has some interesting, look at the size of this bearing. This bearing here is kind of interesting. It actually rides on this, which is kind of cool. And it rides on the inside of this. There's a big seal. There's a retaining clip for the seal. In another video, I'll be giving you all the part numbers for everything that I've replaced. I got most of the parts already. That bearing, that's the lower bearing that fits into the cup area. Up on top here is interesting. This is the drive gear. This is the drive gear that actually rides right about there in the gear case. It's on the top. And interfaces with the big bull gear here, which goes like kind of like this. Now the interesting thing is this thing is really all worn out. It rides on the top of this shaft right here. It actually kind of goes on. I don't think it'll slide on, but it goes on like that. It's keyed in, but you can see all the wear. I do have a replacement gear for this, for both sides. It does need to be machined to fit a little bit. Again, in another video, I'll show you what I do to get the gear to work, as well as I'll give you all the appropriate part numbers. So that way, I'm just cleaning off my hand, that way you have everything you need to hopefully put yours back together. Now we got to keep in mind that they were pulling these parts from a junkyard. So this one I've kind of narrowed it down. It's got to be like a 1935 to like a 1940-ish Ford truck. That's where I think this is, because when I cross-reference some of the parts, they look to be landing in the 35 to 40, 35 to 42 Ford truck. And I'm saying that based on the cam parts, the brake cam parts. I could be wrong, but that's where I'm finding the parts that I need are falling right into that year. Obviously they must have pulled it from that, whatever that rear end came out of, that's where they took the rest of the parts. Not going to replace the drums or anything to that effect. They just need to be cleaned up. One of the, I can't remember if it's this side or that side, but one of the lug nuts need to be replaced. Not a big deal. But overall, that's what's inside a senior gear case. Yours might be just a touch different. This is the bigger brake, like what they call, I guess they would say the V8 brake system. I don't know, but they're larger diameter than the 4-cylinder. Wheel Horse used both of them. This one just happens to be the bigger style that they used. So again, yours could be a little bit different, but I bet you the layout itself is about the same. All right, guys, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's been a little while, as I said, but as always, I'll be back. Thank you for your interest. Please like, share, and subscribe. And have a great day.